Get good? No. Gun good. Hello folks, Phil Gallagher, aka Thraben U here for another Pathfinder 2nd Edition video, and to celebrate the release of Guns and Geared Remastered, which is giving us a remastered Gunslinger and a remastered Inventor, I thought it would be a cool time to go and look at ranged builds and gunslingers and all of the various dedications and archetypes that are related to them. Full disclosure here, I did receive an early access copy of Guns and Gears Remastered from Paizo to make content, so shoutouts to them, and thank you very much for that. So, without further ado, how to gun good. Similarly to my 10 character build idea video recently, this is going to be a lot of starting points. This is going to be a lot of information that is going to give you really cool things that can help you build your ranged characters. This is not going to be finished builds, and I'm going to try to be brief with every core idea here being covered on 1 to 2 slides. I am going to be highlighting the Gunslinger in particular today, although a lot of the dedications and archetypes that we're going to be looking at don't require you to necessarily be a gunslinger if you get training in firearms from some other places. Now, since we are going to be focusing on a release of new material, or rather remastered material today, some of the things that I'm going to be talking about are very, very flavorful and very, very cool. So if you're just here for like, how do I make the gun damage go big? There will certainly be some of that, but today I'm going to be showing a lot of neat things off. Without further ado, let's take a look at the new Gunslinger. Let's talk about niches for just a second here before we get into the Gunslinger itself. Prior to this remastering of the Gunslinger, despite its name and very clear intended role, actually maybe wasn't the best gun user. And a lot of people who wanted to make gun-wielding characters might turn to a fighter or a ranger to do that instead. Especially fighter for the same degree of accuracy as a gunslinger might have. But that has now changed with this remaster, and the gunslinger is now what it was originally intended to be, the best user of guns. Like the fighter, you still have that increased accuracy. You still have +2 over other traditional martials. But the big difference here is in what is now called Slinger's Precision, that was previously called Singular Expertise. This is a feature that has just been redone. So, if you are using a non-repeating crossbow, you now just get +2 precision damage with your strikes. And you get an extra 1d4 precision damage, that is 2.5 damage on average, on strikes using non-repeating firearms. So note here that this non-repeating clause, this is new. Previously, the singular expertise was just kind of fully being applied to all firearms. Since the Gunslinger and all of its various sub-tracks, that is your ways, since they all have a specific type of reload, the Gunslinger has been tweaked ever so slightly to actually, make sure that you are reloading and not just picking up a barricade buster and going until the chamber is empty. This is overall a damage buff to the class. And I think this alone is really going to incentivize a lot of people who maybe were on the fence about the Gunslinger previously to get in there. And later on, this damage can scale up when you become a gunslinging legend. Now, for the people who are interested in the combination weapons, and think Squall from Final Fantasy VIII, the gun blade, if you are interested in that sort of stuff, weapons that can make both ranged strikes and melee strikes, the good news here is that those builds have gotten an effective buff. Because if you are using a combination weapon whose range form is a firearm or crossbow of some kind, you get to use your very nice proficiency with firearms and crossbows for the attacks with the melee configuration of the weapon. And this effectively means that if you are playing a way, such as Way of the Drifter, that actually wants you to get in there and be in melee range, making both strikes with something like a sword and then firing off a gun as well, you have effectively received a buff to your build. There are a number of other changes to the Gunslinger, but they are primarily small beyond this, and it's mostly the names of things changing with their functionality staying the same. Although, I do want to highlight one particular feat, which is now totally cracked. And in good news, it's a level 1 feat, so you can take this right away. Enter Munitions Crafter. This is a feat that previously existed but was a lot less exciting. So, the gist of it is that you get the advanced alchemy benefits, meaning that you can make some consumables. You get consumables equal to 4 plus half of your level, but you have to be making either bombs or, the thing that you actually care about here, alchemical ammunition. And you're going to get a formula book that lets you keep track of what you're allowed to make. Now, the important part comes down here at the end. When you're crafting your alchemical ammunition, you are going to make that ammunition in batches of 4. So looking at their example here, if you were 4th level and you use all of your advanced alchemy consumables to create alchemical ammunition, you could create a maximum of 24 rounds. Yeah, 24 rounds a day. That's a lot. That's a lot. Depending on your adventuring day, that might be more than you could humanly use in your adventuring day. If you wanted to fire fancy ammunition damn near every round of every fight that you did, with 24 bullets at 4th level, you could probably do that. And there might be a lot of turns where you don't actually want to use fancy ammunition, as many of these, in addition to just being loaded into the gun like a regular bullet, they're also going to require an interact action to activate them and have them do their thing. So this is perhaps the most efficient crafting thing that exists on a single feat in the game. This is wild. If you are playing a ranged character who wants to use alchemical ammunition of some kind, or maybe bombs even, this alone might be worth taking the Gunslinger dedication and then Munitions Crafter as a follow-up feat to get. A couple of specific notes here. Number 1, not all ammo is alchemical. And this is giving you a trait that lets you make alchemical ammunition. So if you're like, holy cow, I can make 24 copies of the ammunition that's basically fireball. Okay, you don't get to do that. That one is actually magical ammunition, and those things are different within Pathfinder. Thing number 2, when you look at the ammunition, don't be disappointed by the small numbers that are written on them. So I just took a very, very simple 1st level piece of alchemical ammunition, just the elemental ammunition. So, this ammunition deals 1 persistent damage and 1 splash damage. So, for a very, very simple, no frills turn, you can go ahead and interact, activate your bullet, take a shot, and then take a reload action. And if you're a gunslinger, you probably have some fancy reload that gives you some bonus action economy as well, doing something like fainting while you are doing that. And you might look at this and go, is it really going to be worth my action to just add 1 persistent damage and 1 splash damage? When a lot of times, a melee character might be adding an additional damage die by spending an extra action, doing something like a vicious swing. Is this really going to be worth it? And to get you into the appropriate mindset here, I don't want you to be thinking about this as dealing 1 persistent damage and 1 splash damage. I want you to be thinking about this in terms of what happens when that enemy has a weakness. what happens if you are in a crowd of things that have that weakness? And that one splash damage that is ricocheting off your bullet now triggers, let's say, weakness 5 to fire. What if that one persistent damage is actually 6 persistent damage because you are triggering a weakness? When you view Munitions Crafter and this elemental ammunition and things that are adding this persistent damage, the damage bonus alone is nice, but if you can recall knowledge, or if you have someone who can recall knowledge in your party to give you the support that you need to go like, hey, gun boy, shoot it with acid, it's weak to acid. The amount that you can ramp up your damage by just having access to 24 bonus bullets a day with various elemental coverage is absolutely massive. So while I think a lot of people are going to be really excited about the Gunslinger's innate buff to damage, Munitions Crafter is actually the thing that I think is most exciting about the Gunslinger from this remastered version of Guns and Gears. So if you are excited by Munitions Crafter like I am, and you were like, man, I wish I could lean more into this whole triggering weakness recall knowledge thing sounds awesome, good news, you can. The Spellshot class archetype, meaning that you need to be a gunslinger to take it, replaces some of your gunslinger features with new features. So rather than doing one of the traditional ways, you can become a Spellshot instead. And let's start with Thoughtful Reload down in the bottom corner here. So you are going to take a reload action and a recall knowledge check at the same time in one action. This is very powerful if you have the ability to trigger a bunch of elemental weaknesses. And let's take a look at Energy Shot. On your first 3 strikes of this encounter with a firearm or crossbow, you deal an additional 1 acid, cold, fire, or electricity damage per weapon die. You choose which damage type to deal as a part of making each strike. So you can go fire off your first shot, throw fire damage on that one, go, oh rats, it wasn't weak to fire. What was this thing weak against? Thoughtful Reload, learn that it is weak against something else, and for your next turn, or maybe later that turn, you can go and take another shot with a thing that it is actually going to be weak to. And the Energy Shot is only for your first 3 strikes, and then Munitions Crafter can kick in, and you can use the ammunition that you've made to continue triggering weakness. The class archetype gives you some spell slots. You're going to get a spell book like a wizard would, and you can even do a Magus-style spell strike action called Spell Woven Shot. It is specifically going to use spell attack rolls, and is essentially going to combine your strike with a spell, just like a Magus's spell strike action would do. The Spellshot is something that I think is really cool, and I think if I was going to play a gunslinger, this is the way that I would be doing. I think it is very powerful to have the ability to recall knowledge and do something with the knowledge that you gain. If you are going to become a Spellshot, though, you might want to think, how am I going to get really, really good at recall knowledge? And just kind of build your skill trainings appropriately. And if you can find anything that lets you kind of cheat on recall knowledge, such as additional lore, that might be really strong here. How about some really, really, really fun equipment? Enter Beast Guns. As the name implies, these are guns made out of beasts. And I have a Drake rifle on screen here as an example of this. If you end up liking beast guns, there is a beast gunner dedication that is a 6th level dedication, so you can't take it right away. It is either going to give you some arcane or primal spell casting, and a spell sling action that is a 3-action activity that again is basically a Magus spell strike. There's a couple of different ways to accomplish this while playing these gun-based characters, and they're all really cool. So, highlights of the Drake rifle here. This is a 4th level item, by the way. Yes, 4. This many. You're allowed to do this at level 4. So, it is innately a +1 weapon. with a d10 damage die, a range increment of 150 feet. Now, this is going to be made out of a Drake, so the damage type that it deals is not a traditional damage type. Well, for a gun, anyway. You're going to deal either acid, cold, electricity, fire, or poison damage, depending on what this gun was made from. And traditionally, you are probably going to go on a quest to hunt this thing and make the beast gun yourself. There's some lore type stuff there. If you're interested, look into it. So once a day, you get a 3-action activity to fire a, Omega bullet. So you make a ranged strike. As long as it isn't a crit failure, the rifle deals 1 splash damage per weapon die to the target and all creatures within 5 feet of it. But if you hit, depending on what type of Drake you have, you get to do another thing. And notice here, there is not a save. So it's not hit followed by save to do a thing. It is a hit and it just happens. You're not stopping it. It just happens. So, no save. You could make someone sicken 1, 10-foot status penalty to their speeds for a minute, dazzled and flat-footed, not or, and dazzled and flat-footed for 1d4 rounds, push 10 feet away, and prone, or enfeebled 1 and clumsy 1 for 1 minute. So, this is one of those. Maybe talk to your DM if you want to do this, and maybe they will throw some cool quest for you in the game to go hunt a Drake along with your friends and create this super awesome magical weapon. So, you want sexy guns? This is it. And this is just one beast gun. There are more of them. Check them out. They are really cool. All right, let's talk about some synergistic build ideas now. Gnomes have a really cool ancestry feat called Razzle Dazzle, that as a free action, you can extend the duration of the blinded or dazzled condition you give to a target by 1 round. So it's a once per hour thing, which is often going to mean once per combat, depending on exactly how your campaign is being run. But once per combat, increasing blinded or dazzled by a round is a really, really big deal. And there are 2 archetypes that can give you something really, really interesting to do with this. The first is the Fireworks Technician. This is a very flavorful archetype that allows you to make fireworks that you can launch as a 1 to 3 action activity, depending on how powerful the firework is. Right away at level 2, you can make a flower firework. Aw, that sounds cute. Oh my gosh, it's cracked! So, for 1 action, each enemy within 20 feet of you must attempt a fortitude save. On a failure, the enemy is dazzled for 1 round, and on a critical failure, they are dazzled for 2 rounds. So, I don't know how many enemies are in your typical fights, but if you are frequently fighting a large number of small enemies, this flower can be really good. So you just take an action, boom, you fire it off, you make your flower, you dazzle a bunch of enemies, effectively lowering their accuracy by a staggering portion. And the one that looks the scariest, you give them the razzle dazzle, and they are going to be dazzled for 2 rounds, or maybe 3 rounds instead. There is another archetype called the Pistol Phenom, which has a 6th level feat, so it would get online a little bit later, but a 6th level feat called Dazzling Bullet. So you attempt a performance check against the target's will DC, and you make a ranged firearm strike against that target. If the strike deals damage to the target and you succeeded at that performance check, the creature is dazzled for a round. Which, on its own, ignoring Razzle Dazzle, 1 action to make a strike that maybe dazzles something as well, that alone is pretty good. But when it works, if you then get to give them the Razzle Dazzle, that is actually really strong. So, little gnome, big gun, little gnome shooting off fireworks. This sounds very, very fun to me. I have done Razzle Dazzle builds before, and I found them greatly enjoyable. Highly recommend it. All right, pop quiz. What is the most powerful thing in Pathfinder 2nd Edition? Did you say the heal spell? I mean, that's a pretty good guess. I was actually going for teamwork, though. teamwork was the thing that I had in mind. I want you to imagine that you are sitting down for a new campaign, and one of your friends goes, I would like to play a fighter. Now, a fighter's job is basically go bonk, hit things with high accuracy. What if you became best friends with that fighter? What if you took the dedication called the Sniping Duo dedication? And this allows you to kind of gain benefits from each other. The primary one being that when one member of the duo hits a target, the other member of the duo is then going to get a +1 circumstance bonus per weapon damage die on their next damage roll against that target before the end of their next turn. And I hit it, you hit it, I hit it, you hit it. You can kind of keep this chain of damage going, and you are best friends. The really neat thing about this build is a 6th level feat called Exploit Opening. So, when your spotter, that is like your bonded pair, your BFF, your best mate, when your spotter critically succeeds at a strike against a creature, and that creature is within your first range increment, you get to make a devastating attack after your spotter just made a devastating attack of their own. You are going to make a ranged strike with a +2 circumstance bonus using your crossbow or firearm against the target of that attack. So I want to remind you that the gunslingers and fighters are already starting up to accuracy on normal, like, martial characters, right? So if you are like +4 over some other character, you're hitting a lot, and you're maybe critting a lot on this action. So imagine that you have a party that loves each other and supports each other. Your spellcaster is using fear, or someone is demoralizing the target to make your fighter crit. Your fighter crits after the support from someone, maybe from an aid action. And then all of a sudden you go and you exploit that opening and you get a devastating hit of your own. And you can chain together some seriously disgusting chains of damage. And this is one of those times where you could build a character in the character creation stage that supplements someone really, really well. While a lot of times you think about archetypes as giving you extra variety and covering weaknesses, this is a time where you lean into the fact that you are really good at shooting. And if you have a party who plans around this interaction, you can be crazy strong. This is perhaps not something that you would want to show up to a random one-shot or a random table with, as this is going to require some pretty specific scenarios to work well, but when it does, oh buddy. What if you took a dedication to just literally be lucky? What if you're just the guy who bends down and then the bullet goes whizzing over your head while you bent down to pick up your hat? That is what the Unexpected Sharpshooter dedication is for. It is very, very good at being lucky or making other people unlucky. Unlike a system like, say, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, where advantage, the ability to roll 2 dice and take the better die roll, is handed out left and right like candy, Pathfinder doesn't let you do that very often. There are fortune effects, they exist, with True Strike being the most common one, but True Strike recently received an effective nerf, where you basically get to do it once per combat. I believe it is a 10-minute cooldown timer now. So, finding ways to get fortune effects has gotten a little bit harder. This is a good way to do that. The accidental shot is going to be an additional action over a traditional strike action, but it lets you roll with advantage. And this starts out as being something that you can do once a day, and then at level 8, you can make it once per hour instead. There is also a lucky escape reaction, which allows you to dodge and makes your enemy roll with disadvantage. Again, this starts as something you can do once a day, but then later becomes something that you can do once per hour instead. So if you want to literally just be a lucky character, this is how you go about doing that. I think most people who are going to do gun-based builds are probably going to want to play gunslingers. I think the additional damage that you are getting and the Munitions Crafter feat are very, very powerful draws to want to play the Gunslinger now. And most classes don't have the same action economy as the Gunslinger does. The Gunslingers have a reload action that does something else. So essentially, they have action compression from level 1 for reloads. And that's not something that the other classes get. And while you could just take a Gunslinger dedication to try to get some of those features, I believe your Slinger's reload does not come until like level 10. It's relatively late on. So you don't get that action economy. You don't get that special reload from your way very quickly. There is one class that I think very easily competes with the Gunslinger to be gun users, and that is the Exemplar. But this is a time where not every Exemplar is going to be a gun user. And specifically, it is only one root epithet that I think is going to be good at using guns, at least rivaling the Gunslinger. And that is the Deft root epithet. You get your root epithet at 3rd level. And the important part here is when you spark Transcendence, that is, after you do one of your cool actions that forces your spirit out of your icon and into another icon, you can interact as a free action to reload, that's the part we care about, or draw a weapon icon, either directly before or directly after your Transcendence action. And we don't care about the rest of this for our purposes. There's some other stuff here about stealing or palming objects. That's going to be less relevant for a Gunslinger character who is not going to be up in the mix of things. There are some downsides here. You are not going to have that +2 to accuracy that the Gunslinger is going to have. The spirit damage bonus that you are going to get from your weapon icon is going to be lower than the Gunslinger's precision. The Starshot, I believe, adds 1 spirit damage on hits, and the Unfailing Bow, I believe, also normally adds 1 or 1d4 on a crit. That is just objectively lower than what the Gunslinger is offering you. Notably here, the root epithets are not something that you are going to get from the Exemplar archetype. So while the Exemplar archetype can often be a band-aid to, shore up a character's weakness or make them physically stronger, this is a time where you would have to play the actual factual Exemplar itself. I am eyeing playing an Exemplar Gunner myself for my next primary campaign character. I'm currently looking at the Alchemist archetype on top of that to go and make consumables of my own. Although I've got to think about the Gunslinger now that Munitions Crafter is a thing. But I think I want to make other alchemical items because of the Horn of Plenty, but that's a whole nother thing, and that's not the focus of today. As you are doing research for your ranged characters, don't ignore the other items that are associated with your ranged weapons, such as tools and modifications. A gunner's bandolier, for example, might enable your character build. If you're like, oh, I would love to use a bunch of different guns, kind of like quick drawing them and firing them off, I have different guns for different reasons, but I could never afford all those runes at later levels, the gunner's bandolier might enable your build. Or if you're like, oh, I would really love to do some crazy things with ammunition, the Lucky Draw Bandolier can let you draw a hero card and then get some sort of crazy ammunition depending on what suit that you draw. If your character has a bunch of strength for some reason, the large bore modification could be giving your gun extra damage. Or, if you've got room for some consumables in your budget, the energized cartridge is yet another way for you to go and hit a weakness with a certain type of elemental damage. There's a bunch more stuff than this. A lot of them are not going to be interesting to your specific build, but there are things in these sections, such as tripods that let you stabilize your weapons, scopes that give you some perception bonuses. There's some neat stuff in there that might help your build out. Why don't we end today's video with some practical tips that might apply to a bunch of different character builds Let's just look at some weapons. These are 5 ranged weapons that I think should be on your radar for your builds, and these aren't going to work for every build, but these are the ones that I have kind of saved on one of my character sheets as the, maybe I want to use this. First is the Suckgung. This is a crossbow with a whopping 200-foot range increment, which is absolutely massive. It is a D8 weapon die innately with the Fatal Aim D12 trait, meaning that if you get a critical hit while you're wielding this weapon in 2 hands, you're going to be rolling D12s from a range of 200 feet. Relatively impressive. If you want a physical gun, consider the Jezzail, which is a 90-foot base range increment. It is also a D8 with a Fatal Aim D12 trait, and it also has the Concussive trait, which more or less is going to allow it to deal damage of different types so that it would be better at ignoring things like resistances or triggering weaknesses. While a gunslinger physically might not be interested in a repeating weapon, another class that doesn't have the gunslinger's action economy cheating for reloading might actually be quite interested in a repeating weapon. Repeating weapons do not need to be reloaded immediately and instead have a set number of bullets or bolts that they can fire before they need to be reloaded with, unfortunately, a 3-action reload action. But hopefully that doesn't matter to you for one reason or another. A repeating heavy crossbow has a whopping 180-foot range increment, a D10 weapon die, and has 5 bolts before you need to reload. Massive plus from me. Now, most guns and ranged weapons that we've been talking about are going to have the uncommon trait. The gunslinger itself is innately an uncommon class, and it has access to a whole bunch of uncommon firearms. If your DM is particularly nice, you might be able to use a rare firearm, the Shabad Long Rifle, which has 120-foot range increments, Backstabber, Concussive, Fatal D12, Kickback, Volley, and again, it is a rare weapon. There's a lot of words on this weapon. So many words, in fact, that I forgot to say that it is a D8 weapon at its base. This is a powerful gun, and if you're allowed to use rare stuff in your campaign, consider this. It is strong. And the last one here I mentioned because I didn't know that this existed until recently. If you are a halfling specifically, looking to play a ranged character of some kind, legitimately consider the halfling sling staff. It is a sling with an 80-foot range. It normally rolls a D10 as its die, but there is a feat that is essentially David and Goliath, the feat, that turns that into a D12 versus large or larger creatures. And it also has the propulsive trait, so if you have some strength to your build, you're going to get to add some damage to that as well. So there are more guns than these, there are more ranged weapons than these that are interesting, but these are on my short list of things to be considering. Alright, that's all I have to say. Folks, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day, and if you've made it to this point in the video, please consider leaving me a like, leave me a comment, throw me an upvote on Reddit, do something to help get more eyeballs on this video, because I love making Pathfinder content, and I would love this content to find its way into the hands of people who actually want to see it. Alright, see ya!